The United States is experiencing such severe inflation that game shows are now offering to pay off viewers' people's energy bills as a price. Gas, food, and energy prices are rising due to China's supply chain issues, which is the main cause of inflation. But now that everything else has increased in price, the government is forced to acknowledge that we can no longer place the blame for inflation on China. For instance, the shelter index, which serves as a proxy for rent prices, increased by 0.7%. While this may not sound like much, it is the largest monthly increase since 1991. The price of electricity increased by 15.8% year over year, which is the biggest increase since 1981. The food at home index follows, with a 13.5% increase year over year, the biggest single increase since 1979. As a result, we are breaking records that have stood for 10 years, and it's all because this week's release of the Consumer Price Index, which measures inflation, showed a reading of 8.3%. It was 8.5% last month, so despite appearances to the contrary, inflation is not actually declining. Because the PCE, or Personal Consumption Expenditures, a defensive method of gauging inflation that excludes the cost of food and gasoline from the calculation, has shown an increase. That's because economists discount the price of food and gasoline because they're too volatile. Or, in other words, because their prices fluctuate too much. Furthermore, these are the only two goods that, no matter how much their prices increase, we will still need to purchase. Therefore, economists contend that excluding those two gives them a better understanding of the direction of the core inflation metric. However, even if we use that metric, the core PCE inflation rate is still double what economists predicted at 0.6%, indicating that overall, things have not improved. Even though gas prices are falling, prices for everything else are rising, which is one of the main reasons why the stock market dropped sharply on Tuesday by 4.3% and Bitcoin fell by more than 11% to a price of about $20,000 at its lowest point. Welcome to the Financial Flow. Please like and subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay up on our latest videos. Remember that the federal fund rate is not the cost for us to borrow money as consumers, but rather the cost for banks to borrow money from each other, which of course will have an impact on us as well. The Federal Reserve is about to meet to decide how much to increase the federal fund rate by. The stock market, real estate, cryptocurrency, and everything in between will all be impacted, which makes this significant. The Federal Reserve raised the federal fund rate by 0.75 percentage points on June 16 of this year. That was historic because the last time they did that was in 1994, and this year's instance saw a 2.5% increase in the stock market. Therefore, the market is currently attempting to determine how this will impact it. There is no doubt in my mind that rates will increase. The likelihood that the federal fund rate will fall between 3.25 and 3.25% is 76%, which is obvious. There is currently a 100% likelihood that the FED will raise interest rates by at least 0.5%. The markets will react as follows if the small possibility of a 100 basis point increase, which has never been done before in the history of the FED, happens. However, there is also the potential for an increase of 0.75%, which is what the market hopes to see. According to the first side of the debate, rates should be gradually increased to avoid crashing the economy and displacing workers, although the real interest rate is actually negative. The opposing viewpoint says that rates should be raised right away. This is strange because our interest rate is 2.5%, so why is it negative? It is, but when measured against inflation, the real interest rate is still negative, encouraging people to spend and borrow now if they anticipate price increases in the future. Particularly, consider it from the viewpoint of the older generation who lived through the 1970s. They have lived through a period in which interest rates were over 13% in the 1970s and as high as 19% in the early 1980s. Therefore, they consider the current federal fund rate of 2.5% or the prime rate of 6% to be low and think that by the time we reach the 1970s, rates will be 12% or higher. I would rather borrow money now and spend it, keeping in mind that doing so will increase inflation more. The real interest rate must at least be equal to the CPI's headline inflation rate of 8.5%, because the current level of 2.5 is simply insufficient. Many members of the older generation want the FED to raise interest rates by a full percentage point immediately, rather than waiting until inflation worsens. Now, here is what I believe would happen to the markets if they did that with regard to the stock market. Most likely, the market would increase on the day of the increase. When interest rates rise, borrowing money costs more, making share buybacks and acquisitions more expensive, which should prevent stock declines. That is typically the case, but in times of high inflation, investors prefer to pay less for a company. Because investors must use higher discount rate to account for the time value of money when valuing a company. PE or price earnings values become compressed. Because once more, money today is worth more than it will be in the future, but you have to take high rates of inflation into account. Stocks will eventually increase as a result of this decompression when inflation declines. In terms of the real estate market, this is what happens to the stock market. Naturally, as interest rates rise, homes become less affordable in the short term, but over time, their value declines. November, December, and February will still see an increase in interest rates. What will happen to these rates at the end of the year? And how will that impact investments? 99% of companies lost value, including Apple, which alone lost $194 billion. For instance, Goldman Sachs shockingly stated in a report last week that the traditional stock and bond portfolio would not be sufficient to keep investors afloat. 20% less just this year. Therefore, give up trying to pick up individual stocks or day trade because everything is losing money. According to Goldman Sachs, the ideal stock allocation has dropped from 60% to 45% at the moment. And what should we do with the difference to get back the returns that were stolen? To invest in tangible goods like art. According to recent claims, purchasing power can be protected by art. And the last time inflation was this high, art appreciated at an absurd 33% annually, outpacing both real estate and gold. So here's how you can think about it. The final interest rate at the end of this crazy rate hike cycle is predicted to be somewhere between 4.25 and 4.5%. We are aware that the demand for mortgages has already decreased by 29%, and interest rates are currently at 6%. And that's when the federal fund rate is only 2.5%, which means that the interest rates on a 30-year mortgage could increase by more than 8%. When the federal fund rate reaches 4.5%, that is a significant rate increase, which is obviously very bad news, especially for the real estate market, which could get worse. The fact that this is all that these rate increase expectations are, which is a good thing, says it all. The majority of people today are hopeful that inflation will eventually disappear, especially with the decline in gas prices. The biggest gamble at the moment is the Chinese economy, which has been on the verge of collapse for a while now due to its real estate market, which accounts for 30% of its GDP and is once more in jeopardy. The CEO of China's largest privately owned company has issued a warning to its citizens to brace for impact, as the country is already ready for the crash. There is currently a delicate dance between reality and expectation, as people hope that the Chinese economy doesn't crash because that wouldn't help anyone. However, if it does, the FED won't raise rates on us because it wouldn't make sense to do so. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Have a good one.